Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I had some internet problem. I hope that meeting recording was okay, but we'll see. Yeah, I can hear it.
Okay.
Anyway, you were here. Good for you. Everybody else, anyway. We'll see. Anyway. Just few things about muscle contraction, um, and muscle twitch. So, um, what is? Let's start with the idea of the motor unit. So what is motor unit? So, I have a neuron that controls various muscle cells. This is a motor unit. Motor unit consists of a single neuron that controls multiple muscle cells. Okay? It can be one, well, or one. It can be, motor unit can technically consist of a neuron and one muscle cell, or a neuron and 2, 3, 4, 54, 1,000 muscle cells. But neuron is always one. Does that make sense?
Yes.
When we say a small motor neuron, it means very few muscle cells. When we say a large motor unit, we mean a lot of muscle cells. Okay, but neuron is still single. So muscle twitch is a contraction of a single motor unit. It will look like this. We have a lag phase. This is where excitation happens. Then we have contraction and relaxation phase. Okay? So lag, contraction, relaxation. The shape of a muscle twitch will be different for different motor units. Some muscles contract fast, so it will go. Some contract slow, some contract very, very slow, relatively to others. Okay, so that's one. That's one thing. Now, when your muscle contracts, like a muscle, like a forearm, like a brachioradialis, when it contracts, not all the muscle fibers contract at the same time. So some motor units contract, some motor units do not. They relax. That prevents fatigue. Okay? So your muscle does not get tired. When you contract your muscle, smallest units contract first because they're weakest. That's not enough. Medium-sized units start to contract next. That is not enough. Large-sized units start to contract next. Does that make sense?
Yes.
The ability to produce a sharp, exact, fine movement is inversely correlated with size. If you look at the small unit, it can produce very, very refined movements. Does that make sense?
Yes.
However, those movements will be weak. If we look at large units, they cannot produce very fine movements, but they can produce powerful ones. So basically, if you think about it, when you write, those are very fine movements, but they're not very powerful. Okay? And if you make, I don't know, a deadlift or a bench press, those movements aren't particularly fine movements. They're pretty coarse, but they're very, very powerful. You produce a lot of force. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Now, what determines the force of contraction? There are a couple of determinants. One is the frequency of stimulus. So, if you have many action potentials coming, okay, then on the muscle, they will start to overlap. So This is one contraction, and this is another, okay? Two separate twitches. But if you have this twitch, and then you have another twitch initiated, and you have another twitch initiated here, so what you're going to get instead is the overlap that will look something like that. Okay? So you see, the force, that's force. The force will gradually increase with some relaxation periods. You see?
Okay.
Remember we talked about temporal summation in the nerve signal?
Yes.
And you push the truck by yourself by wiggling it back and forth? Same idea. Okay? So
Okay.
basically temporal summation of twitches. If there is some relaxation, it's called unfused tetanus. When frequency of contractions is so high that there is basically your muscle, the entire muscle goes into one massive twitch, when there's no relaxation between individual signals, it's called fused tetanus. So tetanus means contraction, basically. In the situation with a fused tetanus, that's the maximum amount of effort that your muscle can produce. Like, you are lights out. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes.
Unfortunately, of course, fused tetanus also is the one that produces the most fatigue.
Okay.
So you get tired really fast. Another thing to appreciate about the force of contraction. You have a huge number of motor units in the muscle. So if a nerve signal fails to initiate the action potential, if it's too weak to initiate the action potential, which is graded potential on the muscle and that's it, then none of the motor units will be stimulated, your muscle will not contract. Then the amount of neurotransmitter starts to increase and more motor units being recruited. So eventually, the more motor units are being recruited, the stronger the contraction. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But you have limited number of those. So once the signal from your brain, from your motor cortex, once the signal is so strong that all motor units are recruited, it doesn't matter. So basically, it's kind of a physiological explanation why you have the limit of your force. Because your muscle has only so many motor units, okay? Once you recruited them all, once they are all engaged in the contraction, that's it. You cannot go over that maximum. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes.
I mean, you can increase the signal as much as you want. You recruited everything. That's it.
Okay.
Makes sense, right?
Yes.
Now, few more things. I'm trying to think about like kind of important aspects. Okay. Contraction. It can be isometric when muscle doesn't change its length. Okay? So I'm holding a can. This muscle, biceps, it doesn't change its length. Is it contracted a bit? So it's in a stage of isometric contraction. Or, let's say, I am pushing the whiteboard with my elbow. My shoulder muscle, the deltoid muscle, okay, it's contracted. It does not change its length. It's isometric contraction. Does that make sense? So in isometric contraction, the load is more than the tension that muscle produces. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, in isotonic contraction, there is a movement. So load is less than the force. So your muscle can move. So like doing this. Okay, so this isotonic contractions. An isotonic contraction can be concentric and eccentric. Concentric contraction is the one where muscle shortens. Okay, so like when I do this, okay, my muscle shortens. When I do this, my muscle shortens. When I extend my elbow, my biceps lengthens. So this is concentric biceps contraction. This is eccentric biceps contraction.
Okay,
so like when you do a pull-up, when you pull yourself up, for the biceps, it's going to be concentric. When you lower yourself down, for the biceps, it's going to be eccentric.
Okay,
we got this covered. Yeah, I think contraction-wise, we're good. Few words about the skeletal muscle metabolism. So 3 main ways. One is creatine phosphate. So you have how, basically, the question that we try to answer is how does muscle generate ATP? So one way is this. You have creatine phosphate. Okay, that's phosphate raised G. You have molecule of ADP, and special enzyme transfers phosphate to ADP, making an ATP and leaving creatine behind. Okay? So you can see that this process, which is quite literally one chemical reaction, is very fast.
okay.
So it's very fast, but it's very sort of inefficient. You create one ATP molecule. So you got to have a lot of creatine phosphate to make a lot of ATP. So this type of metabolism, not super efficient, very fast, the fastest actually. Second mechanism is fermentation. So in fermentation, which importantly, creatine phosphate, this mechanism, it's called direct phosphorylation and fermentation. They can occur without oxygen. Okay? So in fermentation, glucose, via several steps, gets converted to lactate or lactic acid. And this process produces 2 molecules of ATP. So this process, the process is called glycolysis. Okay. So glycolysis, which happens during fermentation, gives you only 2 molecules of ATP. So this process is a little better than this in terms of the efficiency, and it's a little bit slower, but it's still pretty decent in terms of the time. Okay. So these 2 processes, direct phosphorylation and fermentation, will be used during the activities which are very short term, very intense. Like when you are lifting. Does that make sense? Like explosive things, like heavy lifting, resistance training, something like that. We good?
Yes. Yes.
And then lastly, we have aerobic respiration. So it does require oxygen. It's slow because there are a lot of steps. But first of all, As a source, it can use glucose or fats or proteins, not only glucose, like fermentation, glucose, fats, proteins, whatever you want. And it generates 36 molecules of ATP. Well, 32, 36. So it's very, very efficient, right?
Yeah.
But it is slow. Now, it means that it will produce a lot of energy out of many sources, but it will take time. So this will be used in the situation when your physical activity is more long-term, not as intense, like running or walking or swimming. Basically, endurance training. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So this two,
Yes.
again, explosive, high-intensity, short-term exercises like lifting, aerobic respiration, endurance training. Right. Which brings us to two types of muscle fibers and some things about lactic acid I wanted to mention too. So first of all, two types of muscle fibers are based on metabolism. Slow oxidative, fast glycolytic. Now, I don't want to rewrite a whole table that you have in the lecture notes. What I want to make clear, first, I'm going to ask you about these two types only. There is a third type, which is called fast oxidative. Not asking. It's kind of in the middle, okay? So,
Okay.
endurance, explosiveness, aerobic respiration, fermentation, and direct phosphorylation. Fibers are thin, thick. A lot of myoglobin because you need oxygen, little myoglobin. A lot of glycogen because you need glucose, not a lot of glycogen. A lot of mitochondria, not a lot of mitochondria. Red, color-wise, more red, more white-ish, less red. A lot of blood vessels, very few blood vessels. So basically, they almost our exact opposite. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So please know these two fibers. It's not complicated. And actually, if you would think of it, one of the examples that I really like. When you eat beef is red, right?
Yes.
Because what cows do, I mean, normally, they walk around, okay? So they essentially do a lot of endurance training. If you ever ate a alligator meat is white. Well, not white, but like much whiter than beef. Why? Because alligator is not an endurance animal. It's an explosiveness animal. It hunts by jumping. It's not going to chase its prey. Does that make sense? It attacks it, and it's totally exhausted after that one effort. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So there you go. Now, any questions so far?
No.
Okay, a few things about muscle fatigue. I'm not going to write anything on board, just tell you. First, people say, oh, muscle fatigue is because of the lactic acid. No. Lactic acid is gone from the muscles in about an hour. Your liver and your heart have perfect capacities to use lactic acid as a source of energy. That's one. Two, and it was shown lactic acid is not the source of fatigue. So what is that? The current idea is that, first and foremost, when you break down ATP, you produce ADP and inorganic phosphate. And inorganic phosphate probably contributes to muscle fatigue. It binds calcium. So phosphate and calcium, they form insoluble salts, and that reduces calcium availability in the muscles. This is why you just get tired, and it takes time to kind of get rid of that stuff. Okay. You might ask, what about that burning sensation after you exercise when you sore? Soreness is not from lactic acid either. Soreness comes from basically a physical damage to the connective tissue in your muscle. Okay? Like, it's normal. It's good. Damage of the connective tissue, inflammation, repair your connective tissue, your epimysium becomes stronger and makes your muscle structurally stronger. We good?
Yes.
Okay. You can read about the Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. I'm not going to ask much about it. Just, the disease of the muscle and so on and so forth. So don't worry about it. I want to say a few words about the smooth muscle. So things that are important to understand. Involuntarily controlled. No sarcomeres. No striations. Always uninucleated. So one nucleus. Yeah, since there are no sarcomeres, there are no Z discs. However, you still have a thick filament, okay, and a bunch of thin filaments. But in this case, thin filaments are attached to so-called dense bodies. Okay? So dense body is kind of a Z disc, but it's not. Okay? So mechanism of contraction is also sliding filaments. Nothing changes here. Power stroke and everything, yeah. But there's no sarcomere. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Good. Now, these dense bodies are connected to each other. So when smooth, and interestingly enough, they are connected so that when smooth muscle contracts, it contracts in a corkscrew fashion, like you squeeze the water out of a cloth. You know what I'm talking about? Like
Yes.
you do this. That's how smooth muscles contract, how individual cells contract. The corkscrew. Now, since there is no sarcomere, the contractile mechanism is also different. And we're going to lay it out on here. So, okay. So that's the smooth muscle cell. It is shaped differently. That doesn't matter. It's a schematic, okay? So first of all, sarcoplasmic reticulum is almost non-existent. So most calcium comes from the outside. Does that make sense?
Yes.
we can ignore sarcoplasmic reticulum totally. So when it comes from the outside, it comes through so-called caveola. So cell produces this invagination. This is where calcium gets trapped. Okay? So calcium gets into the cell and binds to a protein called calmodulin. And calmodulin now is bound with calcium. Okay? Does that make sense? So this is the complex of calmodulin and calcium. Are you following me?
Yes.
Good. This complex activates protein called MLCK, or myosin light chain kinase. So now it's activated. Now, what is kinase? Kinases phosphorylate proteins. Not necessarily only proteins, but this one phosphorylates a particular protein. What does that mean, phosphorylation? So if you have a protein and you add kinase, kinase will add a phosphate residue to the protein. Does that make sense? Vanessa?
Yes, it makes sense.
Yeah, okay, good. So, activated myosin light chain kinase. Myosin light chain. This enzyme, so we have myosin light chain. This kinase will take myosin light chain and we add a phosphate residue to it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
This is a functional form of myosin light chain. This form can form a cross bridge.
Okay.
Make sense, right?
Yes.
How do you relax the muscle? When there is, hold on, oh yeah, here it is. When there is no calcium, there's no complex. When there is no complex, there is no activation. When there is no activation, there is no phosphorylation, and the enzyme called myosin light chain phosphatase, it removes the phosphate from myosin light chain. This cannot form a cross bridge, no contraction, smooth muscle relaxes. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, calcium binds to calmodulin, complex of calmodulin and calcium activate myosin light chain kinase. Myosin light chain kinase phosphorylates the light chain of myosin, contraction starts. Good?
Yes.
Awesome. Few more words about the smooth muscle. Word number one. Brain fart, I'm sorry.
What happened?
I'm trying to think. Oh, yeah. Smooth muscles have so-called. Okay, I now realize. So, first, smooth muscles do not have neuromuscular junctions. I mentioned that before. So you may have several smooth muscles, and then you have what is called a diffuse junction next to them. So this is not, you see, like it's not connected to any particular cell. It releases neurotransmitter. Vanessa, I'm going to mute you for a second. It releases neurotransmitter, and neurotransmitter can interact with all those little cells here. Okay, so it's called diffuse junction. So another thing about smooth muscles, they have so-called latch mechanism. So basically, the premise of this is you have myosin and actin interacting, and they committed to the power stroke. They produce power stroke and muscle contracts. They can stay in the contracted position for a while. The separation is very slow. And that allows your smooth muscles to essentially stay contracted without using energy. It's important. Good. I can see you, Vanessa. Okay. So it's important. It's important because, for instance, your blood vessels, they are constantly a little contracted. And if it would require energy, you would be spending so much energy just on like maintaining your blood vessels contracted. Okay, so this latch mechanism allows your hollow organs, like your intestines or your blood vessels or your stomach, to contract a little and stay a little bit contracted for a long period of time. Does that make sense? Okay, second, it's not hard, it's just you gotta have to imagine. It's called a stress relaxation response. If you imagine that you are inflating a balloon, okay, it becomes more and more stretched, and it basically starts to you inflating the balloon, and you face more and more resistance to inflating it. Does that make sense? It becomes progressively harder to inflate the balloon. Now, if you would take a hollow organ, such as a stomach or urinary bladder, and you will start stretching it, obviously at some point, the stretched walls of an organ will try to squeeze the content of an organ out. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Because, Vanessa, you are frozen. Your images. Are you good? Sometimes.
Yes, I understand.
Okay.
I know my video and my signal are not so great.
It's everybody's, believe me. So, what your smooth muscle can do, it's actually quite unique. Take urinary bladder. You stretch it, and when it is stretched and all tense, it suddenly relaxes. So the pressure on the content decreases. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Because that allows your smooth muscle to get stretched, to relax while being stretched, and to retain its capacity to contract. Urinary bladder is the best example. So urine accumulates there, stretches the bladder, it relaxes, stretches more, it relaxes. When you need to expel urine, it still can contract and produce the forms. Okay, that's a unique feature of a smooth muscle. For instance, if you overstretch a skeletal muscle, no, it's not very efficient. Okay, basically you can think of it this way. When you are doing a pull-up, one of the hardest part is the first one, when your muscles are stretched. Once you contracted them to a certain degree, it's much easier. Okay, smooth muscle can contract even if it's super stretched. So that stress relaxation response, it basically allows a smooth muscle to contract when it's stretched. And last term for smooth muscle that I wanted to mention is we have single unit, okay, or unitary smooth muscle, and multi-unit smooth muscle. So what's a single unit? In single unit smooth muscle, you have a bunch of cells located very close to each other, okay, connected by gap junctions, okay, and they usually contract all together. For instance, the wall of the intestine, the wall of the stomach, the wall of the blood vessel usually need a massive fragment of your intestine or whatever to contract together. Does that make sense? So you can initiate the contraction here in this cell, and through gap junctions it will communicate to all other cells. and they will all contract together. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
I'm telling, go like we're in the class, and I meet someone in the hallway and I tell them, could you tell the class that I'm going to be like 5 minutes late? And yeah, I know that this message is going to be communicated. So this cell is excited, it starts to contract, but ionic changes through gap junctions are communicated to all other cells. Multi-unit, these are usually big organs, so like stomach or intestine. Multi-unit. Cells are far apart, usually are not connected by gap junctions. They usually produce very small and fine movements, like smooth muscle that is your ciliary muscle, regulates the diameter, not the diameter, but the shape of your lens. Does that make sense? So a lot of individually controlled smooth muscle cells. This is why we call it a multi-unit. It's like a crowd. Those are individual cells. Make sense? Yep. That's basically it for the muscle. So if you have any questions, go for it. And we're gonna go ahead.
One about muscles. It might not even be related to this, but when someone's in a coma, or not just a coma, but like a paraplegic or someone that doesn't move, what happens to the muscle that it breaks down, or
it's a great
what
question.
happens?
They degrade. So that's a fantastic question. So your muscles, they need to have neuronal stimulation, nerve stimulation all the time. Like
Okay.
when you're sleeping and you think you are relaxed, your brain, your motor cortex, constantly sends signals to your muscles and they stay a little bit contracted. This is called a muscle tone. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes.
Now imagine somebody is paraplegic. So let's say damage was done somewhere T10, okay? So legs are paralyzed, lower abdomen is paralyzed. We say paralyzed means there's no signal that can reach there. The road, the spinal cord, is broken. Like, it's resected, right? So no, not at all. Not just control. There is no communication whatsoever. When there are no nerve signals that reach the muscles start to be replaced by connective tissue. So for instance, I have a friend who's quadriplegic, and he's been in the wheelchair since like 2001 or something. By now, if for some unique magic somebody would be able to fix his spine, he wouldn't be able to walk because he virtually has no muscles in his legs. Like none. It's all fat and connective tissue. You see? And the problem is you cannot regrow them. When you look at those huge guys and gals with massive muscles and so on, you know what I'm like, bodybuilders?
Yes. Yes.
We say, oh, their muscles grow. No. Well, okay, they do grow, but they grow not because there are many more cells. It's because each cell becomes much larger. So this is called hypertrophy instead of hyperplasia.
Okay.
Hyperplasia, new cells. Hypertrophy, existing cells become bigger. Hyperplasia of a muscle, growth of new cells, is very, very, very rare.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So like if you look at I don't know, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, okay? He's a big guy. I mean, he was a big guy, like probably, pretty massive. But all these muscles, it's the result of hypertrophy. His muscle cells are huge. That makes sense?
Okay. Yes. How do steroids play a part in that?
They stimulate protein synthesis and growth.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And I can tell you, I spoke to a guy who used to do professional bodybuilding, like for professionally, like making money, making a living.
Uh-huh.
And I asked him about steroids in bodybuilding, and he said, "Yep, everybody, every person. If you go professional, you use steroids. Period.
Oh.
It's not just you buy them on the black market and nonchalantly just pop the pill, now and then. There are very scientific, proven, like very worked out programs. It's not only steroids, it's growth hormone, it's insulin. Like they use all kinds of hormonal supplementation to improve the performance. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. The problem with the
Okay.
steroids, we're not talking about it in AP. We're talking about it in AP2. The problem with steroids is when somebody starts taking, like for instance, if somebody starts taking testosterone,
Uh-huh.
you're well. If you're female, you start to become masculine. It's called masculinization. There are disorders when females become masculine. It's fine. If basically there should be a balance between testosterone and estrogen in the female organism, certain levels should be. If you are a male and you start taking testosterone, your testes say, to hell with it. We're not making any.
Oh,
Okay? And your endocrine system stops sending signals to produce testosterone. And testes start to shrink. And if you take testosterone for an extended period of time as a male, you become sterile.
oh, okay.
There's another interesting consequence of it. This is why nobody takes testosterone. People take derivatives of it, which is still not good. But when wannabe bodybuilders were taking testosterone, testosterone is metabolized in the liver, and it is metabolized into estrogen. And if you are a male and your estrogen levels start to rise, that leads to feminization. And the first sign of feminization is called gynecomastia, when men start to grow breast tissue.
Okay.
And that's a very well known side effect of testosterone supplementation.
Okay.
So
Does the same thing happen with like the men that produce low test or that have low testosterone?
not so much, well, not so much low testosterone, but high estrogen.
Okay.
Yeah, there are disorders that have this people. They're not frequent, but there are disorders when people having this problem. By the way, speaking of testosterone, at some point there were a lot of advertisement of like testosterone gel for men. For men.
Yeah.
There is no evidence showing that this supplementation have any benefit.
Oh, okay.
So like there's no life improvement in quality of life, there's no improvement in strength, in physical activity, blah blah blah, what's sexual activity, nothing.
Oh,
And yeah,
wow.
there was a big study, a retrospective study, and it showed that no, nothing.
Okay. Well, thank you for answering that.
Sure, anytime.
No more questions.
I will keep you all updated whether or not there will be an anatomy session tomorrow.
Okay.
I will check what the exam looks like, and if not, I'll just write it in the announcement page, and then you can enjoy like your mornings without me.
Yes. In case I am not on, I do have a meeting at 8 a.m., so I might be on at like 9:05, 9:10.
No problem.
Unless you cancel.
Yes, of course, of course.
All right.
All right. Have a good day. Enjoy the weather.
All right. Thank you. You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.